Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom. I'm the creator of rulingplanets.com and Christopher Renstrom Astrology. And this time, I wanted to welcome you to a very special show entitled The Astrology of the Wonderful Wizard of Oz. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was published on May 17, 1900 by L. Frank Baum. It is 125 years old and in 2025 celebrated its 125th anniversary. It's an amazing story. Indeed, it's America's first fairy tale. It's generated so much wonder, so much joy in its telling and its reading, and it's even produced 3 iconic anthems. There's the lovely lullaby Over the Rainbow, sung by Judy Garland in the 1939 film. There's Home, from the Broadway musical and film The Wiz, which was originally sung by Stephanie Mills, who played Dorothy on Broadway. And Home became a song of solace during the AIDS crisis in the 1980s and 1990s, when so many people were being turned out of their homes and rejected by their families. And of course, there is the extraordinary and uplifting Defying Gravity, which recently appeared in the musical and film Wicked. Humanistic Astrology. That was a name coined by the 20th century astrologer Dane Rudhyar. He basically said that a horoscope isn't some weather-beaten house assailed by the wind, rain, and blistering heat of the sun and the other transiting planets, but rather a horoscope houses the unique planetary architecture that resides inside each one of us. By moving the focus from event-oriented to choice-centered, humanistic astrology takes the view of turning to the planets as archetypes for guidance and healing. But this guidance isn't like a book that we take down off the shelf. The guidance comes from meeting the planets where they appear in our lives. Humanistic astrology says that your horoscope acts as a kind of roadmap for your own individual development. And I can think of no better example of a road trip than The Wizard of Oz. What I want to do in this episode is tell you the story of The Wizard of Oz by using the planets as guides in a journey towards individuation. We begin with the planet Saturn, and Saturn I associate with the character of Uncle Henry. Saturn, like Uncle Henry, is old, pale, and cold. Saturn is also the planet of tests, trials, and hardship. At the beginning of our story, Dorothy lives in the midst of the great Kansas prairies with Uncle Henry, a farmer, and Aunt Em, who was a farmer's wife. When Dorothy stood in the doorway of their house and looked around, she could see nothing but a great gray prairie on every side. The sun had baked the plowed land into a gray mass. Even the grass wasn't green because the sun had burned the tops of its long blades until they were the same gray color to be seen everywhere. When Aunt Em came to live there, she was a young and pretty wife, but the sun and the wind had changed her too. They had taken the sparkle from her eyes and left them a sober gray also. She was thin and gaunt now, and when Dorothy, who was first an orphan, came to live with them, Aunt Em had been so startled by the child's sparkling laughter that she would scream and press her hand upon her heart whenever Dorothy's merry voice reached her ears. And she still looked at the girl with wonder that she could find anything to laugh at. It was Toto who made Dorothy laugh and saved her from growing as gray as her surroundings. Saturn is the planet of farmers in astrology. Of all the vocations that are ruled by the planet Saturn rules over people who have to toil hard for a living, without any guarantees that they're going to reap a fine harvest. And so the living of a farmer is hard, it's tough, and it can be very, very bleak. We have no idea how Dorothy came to be with Uncle Henry and Aunt Em, or what happened to Dorothy's parents. All we know is that her childhood looks to be as bleak as the Kansas landscape itself. Now it's Uncle Henry who's the first to spot the cyclone on the horizon. He calls out to Aunt Em and Dorothy to run inside the house and get down into the storm cellar while he goes and fetches the animals. Aunt Em and Dorothy run into the house, and Dorothy is about to follow her aunt down into the storm cellar when Toto leaps out of Dorothy's arms and hides under her bed. And it's when Dorothy is going to retrieve him when suddenly the north and south winds met where the house stood, making it the exact center of the cyclone. The great pressure of the wind on every side of the house raised it higher and higher until it was at the very top of the cyclone. And there it remained, and was carried miles and miles away as easily as you would carry a feather. Now, the cyclone in our story is symbolic of the planet Uranus. Uranus we can think of as the Wheel of Fortune. After all, Uranus is the only planet that orbits the sun, rotating on its side. Its north and south poles are where every other planet's equators are. So you can think of Uranus as a wheel in the sky that keeps on turning. What's up one day is down the next, and vice versa. When Uranus enters a zodiac sign by transit, it upends the fixtures of your life. Yet the planet of revolution and change, named that because it was discovered at the midpoint between the American War for Independence and the French Revolution, is also the planet of revelation. Dorothy's world was made bleak and gray by the loss of her parents, but now Uranus, as the cyclone, is going to transform that personal catastrophe into a catharsis by transporting Dorothy to Oz. Catastrophe is a word that naturally comes to mind when we think of the planet Uranus. In fact, catastrophe means overturning or sudden turn. And a catharsis? A catharsis means to purify, to cleanse, such as the purging or release of emotions through a powerful experience. And finally, I want you to notice that the Wheel of Fortune resembles a horoscope, or the look of a horoscope. It's a wheel, just like a horoscope is a wheel. In humanistic astrology, the challenge is to move from the rim of the wheel to its center. When you look at the rim of the wheel in this image of the Wheel of Fortune, you see that someone is on top, experiencing good fortune. And then you look to one side as the wheel is turning, and you see that this person's fortunes are being lost, that they're in a downward turn, and they keep going down until they reach the bottom of the wheel, where they experience a complete loss of fortune. And then the wheel starts turning again, bringing that person who's at the bottom of the wheel back up towards the top. Humanistic astrology asks you to focus your gaze on the center, rather than on the edge of the wheel, to move from where events happen to you to a place where you can integrate and embody the forces at play in your own astrological chart. To me, Dorothy signifies the moon, planet of the body, and storehouse of our emotions, memories, habits, and rituals. The moon was named after the Roman goddess Diana, who was the guardian of little girls. So Diana was the one who protected both mothers and their infants, particularly in childbirth. The moon is also where you go in your astrological chart when you are frightened. And during the time that the house is being carried through the sky, Dorothy experiences a kind of gentle rocking from side to side, like a cradle, so that she eventually climbs up on her bed and falls asleep. When Dorothy lands in Oz, she lands in the east, where the sun rises. And it's such a soft landing that Dorothy doesn't wake up at first. And when eventually she does, it takes her a few moments to remember what exactly had happened to her. She leaves her house and finds herself in a countryside full of flourishing trees and aromatic flowers. Needless to say, it's the exact opposite of Kansas. She is greeted by 3 short men and an old, kind-looking woman in curious dress. The old men were about her height and dressed in blue, and the old woman was dressed in white robes full of stars that glistened like diamonds in the sun. The old woman introduces herself to Dorothy as the Witch of the North, and she thanks Dorothy for vanquishing the Wicked Witch of the East, who had enslaved the Munchkin people. The Witch of the North goes on to explain that there are 4 witches in the land of Oz. There are witches of the North and South, and those are the ones that are good, and there are witches of the East and West, and those are the ones who are not. Dorothy is trying to take all of this in when she turns around and gasps in fright when she sees 2 feet shod in silver shoes with pointed toes sticking out from beneath her house. Now this is a haunting image, and one that also provides the first real hint about Dorothy's past. Did Dorothy's mother die in an accident, or perhaps in childbirth, leaving Dorothy blameless, but perhaps feeling guilty because she survived? The Munchkins cry out in alarm as the feet of the Wicked Witch of the East shrivel up and disappear, leaving only the shoes. The Witch of the North laughs and says, "She was so old that she dried up quickly in the sun." Well, that is the end of her. But the silver shoes are yours, my dear girl, and you shall have them to wear. To me, what's so fascinating about these silver shoes is that silver is the color of the moon, and the moon is also the planet of travel, short journeys rather than long explorations, as the moon travels through all 12 zodiac signs in just 1 month in Western astrology, and in Eastern astrology, the moon travels through 28 lunar mansions, each of which is associated with a star group and sometimes a deity. The Witch of the North gives the silver shoes to Dorothy and tells her that they are charmed. Dorothy asks the witch if she can help her to get back to Kansas, but the good witch cannot. She tells Dorothy that Oz is surrounded by a great desert that no one can pass. Dorothy begins to cry, and the good witch, feeling bad, takes off her magic cap and asks the magic cap what to do. The magic cap transforms itself into a slate, which spells out the message, "Let Dorothy go to the City of Emeralds." "Where is the City of Emeralds?" Dorothy asks. "It lies at the center of the country and is ruled by a great and powerful wizard," the good witch responds. "How do I get there?" "You must walk. It is a long journey through a country that is sometimes pleasant and sometimes dark and terrible." "Won't you go with me?" asked Dorothy. "No, I cannot, but I will give you my kiss." And the witch kissed Dorothy gently on the forehead. "And with this kiss," the witch explained, "no one will dare harm you." Now the road to the Emerald City is paved with yellow brick, and when you get to Oz, do not be afraid to tell him your story, and he will help you. The figure of the good witch symbolizes the North Star. This is something that appears a lot in Chinese and Japanese mythology, as well as in Chinese and Japanese astrology. The North Star was known as Domu in Chinese astrology, and she is the goddess of heaven. Her name means Mother of the Big Dipper, as she gave birth to the 7 stars that make up the constellation of Ursa Major. Myokin is the Japanese deification of the North Star and the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. Myokin rides a dragon or a tortoise because both creatures were associated with the North. Navigation on land and at sea used the Big Dipper as a compass, which was why Myokin blessed safe voyages and was prayed to by many for guidance. Myokin has 4 arms. In his upraised hands, he holds the sun and the moon, and in his lower hands, he holds pen and paper, where he notes the good and bad deeds of humankind, which puts me in mind of someone else who's connected to the North, who keeps track of people who are naughty and nice. The North Star, also known as Polaris, serves as a natural compass in the Northern Hemisphere. It's located very close to the North Celestial Point, making it appear stationary in the sky while the other stars rotate around it. By finding Polaris, you can determine which way is north and by extension, east, west, and south. Now, the first character that Dorothy meets on the Yellow Brick Road is the Scarecrow, who represents Mercury. And this makes a lot of sense because Mercury and the moon are the fastest moving planets in astrology. Mercury and the moon are both associated with the mind, messages, and travel. Mercury represents the conscious mind, the waking mind, and the moon represents the unconscious mind, the sleeping mind. Mercury rules over messages that you receive in the waking world, like a text, while the moon rules over messages you receive while asleep, like with dreams. Mercury was also known as the companion of man. He was the god you were most likely to meet in your day-to-day life, like maybe on your way to market. Mercury didn't have a temple or a sacred grove or an altar, and that's because Mercury was always on the go. He was always out and about, going from hither to thither. Mercury was also the god who helped you to find lost objects. Being raised Catholic, I remember often being told to pray to St. Anthony, the Christian version of Mercury, if I ever needed help finding my keys or my wallet. Dorothy meets the Scarecrow when she stops to rest beside a cornfield on her journey on the Yellow Brick Road. She studies the Scarecrow, thinking, he doesn't look so different from the scarecrows back at home, when she suddenly notices the Scarecrow winking at her. It takes Dorothy a moment to realize that this wasn't a trick of the mind, and that the Scarecrow is really alive. He introduces himself and asks Dorothy if she might not help him down off the pole that stuck up his back, so that he might move about more freely. Dorothy does so as he is stuffed with straw and is very light. The Scarecrow asks, "Who are you? And where are you going?" And Dorothy responds, "My name is Dorothy, and I'm going to the Emerald City to ask the Great Oz to send me back to Kansas." And the Scarecrow asked her, "Where is the Emerald City? And who is Oz?" And Dorothy responded, "Why, don't you know?" "No, indeed I know nothing. You see, I'm stuffed with straw, and I have no brains at all." "Oh," Dorothy responded, "I'm awfully sorry for you." The Scarecrow then asked, "Do you think if I go to the Emerald City with you that Oz would give me some brains?" And Dorothy said, "I cannot tell, but you may come with me if you like. If Oz will not give you any brains, you will be no worse off than you are now." Now, the Scarecrow was literally born yesterday. That's when he was stuffed with straw and set up in the cornfield. So he has no common sense whatsoever. He's constantly falling into holes in the road rather than avoiding them. The road is not really that well paved, often calling out to Dorothy to come help. He's full of questions and is curious about Dorothy. Dorothy tells him about Kansas and the Cyclone, and after listening carefully, the Scarecrow says, "I cannot understand why you should wish to leave this beautiful country and go back to that dry, gray place you call Kansas." And Dorothy says, "Well, that's because you have no brains. No matter how dreary and gray our homes are, we people of flesh and blood would rather live there than in any other country, be it ever so beautiful. There's no place like home." And the Scarecrow sighed and said, "Of course I cannot understand it. If your head was stuffed with straw like mine, you would probably all live in beautiful places, and then Kansas would have no people at all. It is fortunate for Kansas that you have brains." As Dorothy and Scarecrow followed the Yellow Brick Road, it went from cornfields to forest and then to very thick and very dark forest. And it was even starting to get dark. Now, the Scarecrow wasn't really worried about this because he didn't need to sleep or eat, but Dorothy was a bit concerned. It was about this time that they discovered an empty house in the middle of a very dark and thick wood. And so that's where Dorothy decided to sleep, and the Scarecrow stood guard. In the following morning, Dorothy got up and went out to drink some water from a stream, and that's when she espied a Tin Woodman, standing absolutely still, holding an axe upraised in his hands. And Dorothy was wondering, what's this weird-looking creature, and why is it stuck here in the middle of the woods? She wondered also whether it was even alive. But the figure began to say something to her, and she could hear him say, "Oil can." And she was like, "What was that again?" And he said, "Oil can." And it was then that Dorothy espied on a wood stump an oil can. And she went and she squeezed the oil into the Tin Woodman's jaws. And that was when the Tin Woodman was able to talk, asking Dorothy to oil his mouth and his head and neck, and then his arms and his legs, so that he would be able to walk around. The Tin Woodman told Dorothy and the Scarecrow that he had been stuck there because he was caught chopping wood in the rain and thereby rusted. To me, the Tin Woodman with his axe represents Mars. Mars is the planet in astrology that gets you what you want. And like Mars, the Tin Woodman fights, builds, defends, and powers through with a locomotive tenacity for the sake of his companions. He's stalwart, just like Hans Christian Andersen's The Steadfast Tin Soldier. But he has no heart. So how did the Tin Woodman come to be? Well, the Tin Woodman was once a woodman who was in love with a Munchkin girl, whose mistress was very jealous and possessive of her, and whose mistress gave the Wicked Witch of the East 2 sheep and a cow to bust up their relationship. And the Wicked Witch of the East did this by enchanting the woodman's axe, so that one day, when the young woodman was building a house for his future fiancée, the axe slipped out of his hand and chopped off his left leg. The woodman cried out in horror and thought this was the end of everything, but his friends came round and took him to a tinsmith, and the tinsmith made the woodman a new leg out of tin. This angered the Wicked Witch of the East, and so she cursed the axe again, and the axe slipped once more and took out his right leg. Once again the woodman cried out and was taken to the tinsmith, who replaced his right leg with tin. The axe slipped again and took away one arm and then the next, and each arm was then replaced. The axe slipped again and chopped off the woodman's head, and the Wicked Witch of the East thought, well, this was the end of him, but the tinsmith replaced that too. Finally, the axe slipped again and split the woodman's body in two. The tinsmith rebuilt him, but was unable to replace his heart. And the Tin Woodman, now heartless, no longer cared if he married the Munchkin girl or not. At this point in the story, the Tin Woodman sighed, saying that when he was in love, he was the happiest man on earth. And if perhaps, if the wizard were able to give him a heart, he could return to the Munchkin maiden and marry her. The Tin Woodman joins Dorothy and the Scarecrow and makes himself quite useful, as he's the one who's able to cut away the bushes and the branches of trees as they journey deeper and deeper into the dark forest. This is when they hear a terrible roar, and a lion comes bounding into the road. With one swipe of his paw, the lion sends the Scarecrow spinning, and with another swipe, he knocks the Tin Woodman down to the ground. The lion was about to go after Toto, when Dorothy rushed forward and slapped him on the nose. The lion looked at her in shock, and then burst into tears. And Dorothy said, "Don't you dare bite Toto! You should be ashamed of yourself, a big beast like you biting a poor little dog." "I didn't bite him. I didn't bite him." "No, but you tried to." Why, you're nothing but a big coward." "It's a mystery. I suppose I was born that way. All the other animals of the forest naturally expect me to be brave, for the lion is everywhere thought to be the king of the beasts. But I learned that if I roared very loudly, every living thing was frightened and just got out of my way. Whenever I've met a man, I've been awfully scared, but I just roared at him, and he always ran away as fast as he could. If the elephants and the tigers and the bears ever tried to fight me, I should have run myself. I'm such a coward. But just as soon as they hear me roar, they all try to get away from me, and of course I let them go." "But that isn't right," the Scarecrow said. "The king of the beasts shouldn't be a coward." And the lion said, "I know it. It is my great sorrow, and it makes my life very unhappy. But whenever there is danger, my heart begins to beat fast." And the Tin Woodman said, "Perhaps you have heart disease." "It may be," the lion responded. "If you have heart disease," the Tin Woodman continued, "then you ought to be glad, for it proves that you have a heart. For my part, I have no heart, so I cannot have heart disease." The lion thought about that for a moment and said, "Perhaps if I had no heart, I should not be a coward. Have you brains?" "I suppose so. I never looked to see." And the Scarecrow said, "I'm going to the Great Oz to ask him to give me some, for my head is stuffed with straw." And the Tin Woodman said, "And I'm going to ask him to give me a heart." And Dorothy said, "And I'm going to ask him to send Toto and me back to Kansas." And the lion asked, meekly, "Do you think Oz could give me courage?" And the Scarecrow said, "Just as easily as he could give me brains, or give me a heart, or send me back to Kansas." And then the lion said, "Well, then, if you don't mind, I'll go with you, for my life is simply unbearable without a bit of courage." Eventually, Dorothy and her companions emerged from the forest and into a wide field of flowers, beautiful flowers. They look so lovely, and it's so wonderful to feel the daylight upon them once again. And so they walk along innocently, without thinking anything of where they're passing by, little realizing that the field of flowers that they're walking through is a field of poppies. Now, the field of poppies I naturally associate with Neptune, as you can see in this illustration of Dorothy dozing in the field of poppies, something that I call Fentanyl Dorothy. But what's interesting here is the history of opium in the United States. Opium's history in the United States is as old as the nation itself. During the American Revolution, the Continental and British armies used opium to treat sick and wounded soldiers. Benjamin Franklin took opium late in life to cope with severe pain from a bladder stone. It was the Civil War that helped set off America's opiate epidemic. The Union Army alone issued nearly 10 million opium pills to its soldiers, plus 2.8 million ounces of opium powders and tinctures. Male doctors in the United States turned to morphine to relieve many female patients' menstrual cramps, diseases of a nervous character, and even morning sickness. Eventually, overuse led to addiction, so that by the late 1800s, women in the United States made up more than 60% of opium addicts. Uterine and ovarian complications cause more ladies to fall into the opium habit than all other diseases combined, wrote Dr. Frederick Herman Hubbard in his 1881 book, The Opium Habit and Alcoholism. Dorothy and her companions are rescued from the poppy fields by the Queen of the Mice and her mousy minions. And that's not an hallucination, it really happens in the book. And then they finally reach the gates of the Emerald City. The Emerald City sits at the center of Oz. And what's really intriguing about the Emerald City is that it really is a mix of both Neptune and Jupiter energies. And so when Dorothy the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, the Lion, and Toto reach the gates of the Emerald City, they are told that they cannot enter unless they put on a pair of special glasses. They're told that they need these glasses because the Emerald City is so resplendent in its glory, in its emerald glow, that they would go blind if they didn't wear these glasses. But at the same time, when the glasses are put on, they are locked into place by a key so that the person cannot take the glasses off. This reminds me of the idea of Neptune and hypnosis. But at the same time, it also reminds me of Jupiter, because Jupiter is the planet of belief. Jupiter can take on an absolute belief in the way that it insists that you believe in its particular worldview. And this is where we start to get a suspicious feeling, a sense of maybe an authoritarian control about the wizard over the Emerald City itself. Dorothy makes her request to see the wizard, but before she sees the wizard, she's given a beautiful frock to wear when she sees him. Now, this is because she's been traveling in the same gingham dress that she's been sleeping in every night, and that she's been wearing since the Cyclone picked up her house and carried her to Oz. So Dorothy's given this beautiful frock to wear, and it's a glorious emerald that she sees, and she feels very ready and a bit frightened about her audience with the wizard, who finally agrees to see her after keeping her waiting for about 3 or 4 days. Now, when Dorothy sees the wizard, she tells him her story, just like the Witch of the North told her to, and then she makes her request, which is asking him to return her to Kansas. The wizard says to her, and after a while he says, "Now, why should I answer this request that you are making of me?" And Dorothy says, "Because you are strong, and I am weak. Because you are a great wizard, and I am only a little girl." And the wizard says to her, "But you were strong enough to kill the Wicked Witch of the East." And Dorothy replies, "That just happened. I couldn't help it." "Well, I will give you my answer. You have no right to expect me to send you back to Kansas unless you do something for me in return. In this country, everyone must pay for everything he gets. If you wish me to use my magic power to send you home again, you must do something for me first. Help me, and I will help you." "What must I do?" Dorothy asked. "Kill the Wicked Witch of the West." "Oh, but I cannot." "You killed the Wicked Witch of the East, and you wear the silver shoes, which bear a powerful charm. There is now but one Wicked Witch left in all this land, and when you can tell me she is dead, I will send you back to Kansas, but not before." And the little girl, upon hearing this, wept. So Dorothy, gathering up her pluck and courage, sets out for the West, accompanied by the Scarecrow, Tin Woodman, the Lion, and Toto. And what's interesting about her journey to the West and her pursuit of the Wicked Witch of the West is that there is no yellow brick road to follow. The yellow brick road can take her to the Emerald City, but now Dorothy is traveling over territory that is uncharted, that is unnavigable. The sun sets in the West, and every epic poem has a descent into the underworld that starts out with a journey to the West, because that's where the sun sets. Epic heroes like Gilgamesh, Odysseus, and Aeneas all descend down into the underworld, and in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's story is no different. Now, it is the Wicked Witch of the West who's the first to spot Dorothy and her companions, and she sends crows and bees and wolves out to destroy them, and the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman fighting together fight them off. And then finally, the Wicked Witch puts on her golden cap. And this is interesting to me because Pluto was famous for wearing a cap, which is why I associate Pluto with the Wicked Witch of the West. The cap that Pluto wore was called the Cap of Invisibility. The Cap of Invisibility is what the hero Perseus borrows when he goes to behead Medusa. The Cap of Invisibility is what Perseus is also wearing when he goes to save the Princess Andromeda from Poseidon's sea monster. The Cap of Invisibility is what allowed Pluto, god of the dead, to move about unseen when he visited the world above ground. So here we have a golden cap. And as you may also recall, gold belongs to Pluto, because Pluto rules over the underworld, which is where we bury bodies and seeds. But the underworld is also where we draw our wealth. Gold, silver, precious metals, and oil. We draw it from beneath the earth, from the underworld. This is why the word plutocracy refers to the wealthy class in English. So the Wicked Witch dons her golden cap, which bestows whoever wears it with 3 wishes, but the Wicked Witch of the West has already made 2. Her first wish was to command an army of flying monkeys to make the Winkies her slaves. And her second wish? Her second wish was sending the flying monkeys into battle against the Wizard of Oz and to drive him out of the West. And now she has her third and final wish. And her third and final wish is to send the flying monkeys to abduct Dorothy and the lion and to get rid of the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman, who are useless to her. In this illustration, we see the flying monkeys capturing the lion and Dorothy. The lion and Dorothy are the 2 characters who represent the luminaries in astrology. The luminaries are the sun and the moon. And I find it fascinating that it's during an eclipse that the sun and moon are said to be abducted by the underworld. What's also interesting is that the sun and moon are associated with life and living here on Earth, and that the lion and Dorothy are the only flesh and blood members of Dorothy's party. They are mortal, whereas the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman aren't flesh and blood creatures, which means they aren't mortal. Another quick note that I want to make about this illustration is that you can see that Dorothy is still wearing her Emerald City dress. And it was only after Dorothy had left the Emerald City that she noticed that the dress she was wearing is actually white. It's not emerald at all. It had lost its color when the emerald glasses she was wearing were removed. So you can sort of think of this as an Emerald City version of wearing rose-colored glasses. And another quick note is the flying monkeys. I think that the flying monkeys symbolize the Centaur asteroids in this story. They're a rowdy bunch and a tough group to handle. The monkeys bring Dorothy and the lion back to the Wicked Witch's castle. And it's there at the castle that the witch sees Dorothy and is struck with fear. She's struck with fear because she sees the mark of the Witch of the North on Dorothy's forehead, the kiss, and she knows that because of this kiss, that Dorothy cannot be harmed. The Wicked Witch also sees the silver shoes with their power and magic, and she knows that these shoes are enchanted and that they will protect Dorothy. So the Wicked Witch of the West schemes to get those silver slippers. What she does at first is that she makes Dorothy work like a scullery maid. She commands Dorothy to clean this and that, to scrub the floor and to work day and night. And Dorothy does. She immediately adopts the role of a servant and accepts that she is powerless. So the witch knows that Dorothy doesn't know how powerful Dorothy really is. And the witch covets those silver shoes. One day, the Wicked Witch puts an iron bar on the floor and hides it by turning it invisible so that Dorothy can't see it. And when Dorothy is scrubbing the floor, she trips over the invisible iron bar and falls flat on her face. During her fall, one of her silver shoes flies off and the witch snatches it away. The Wicked Witch of the West laughs triumphantly as she shakes the shoe at Dorothy and says, "And I will get the other one too. After all, I must have a matching pair." And this is where we know that Dorothy, who symbolizes the moon, probably has a Taurus moon in her astrological chart. Because what she does is that she gets so angry at her shoe being taken away from her that she grabs that bucket of dirty water that she's been carrying and she throws it at the witch, and the witch immediately melts. The melting of the witch is, symbolically speaking, the conquering of the fear of death, which immobilizes all of us if we think about it. It sends a shiver through our spines. We all know that we will all die one day, but it still begs the question, what kind of life do you want to live in the meantime? What kind of life do you want to live for yourself? After the witch has melted, Dorothy sees the golden cap. It's as golden as the sun, and she puts it on her head. And in that moment, we see combined the sun and moon in one person. The sun on her head, like a halo really, and the silver shoes on her feet. Dorothy then reads the directions that are written inside the cap. And that's how you can tell that this is an American fairy tale. She reads the directions that are written inside the cap, and she commands the flying monkeys to take her and her friends back to the Emerald City. I think we all know this part of the story where it's Toto that reveals that the wizard is no wizard at all, but actually a man behind a screen that operates it. But what's interesting about this part is how much the wizard is a stand-in for L. Frank Baum himself. Remember that the Emerald City stands at the center of Oz, and that the city of Chicago at this time was pretty much the center of America. Indeed, Chicago was the wealthiest city until New York City took over that title a little bit later. When L. Frank Baum moved his family to Chicago in 1891, he was a washout. He had been an oil tycoon and failed, a shop owner and he lost his business, a newspaper publisher who went out of business. He had dabbled with limited success as an actor, playwright, salesman, and even a chicken breeder. But it was in Chicago, living with his family on Humboldt Boulevard, that Baum took work as a department store window dresser and was very good. In 1900, Baum published The Art of Decorating Dry Goods Windows and Interiors, a Bible for those in the trade. This book established him as the country's leading window trimmer. Image-heavy, the volume includes diagrams detailing proportions for proper display layouts, explanations for how to engineer illusions, and lavish photographs of model windows from across the country. There's a window for every occasion and a trick to ensnare gazers. People will always stop to examine anything that moves, Baum wrote. Highlight the possibilities lying dormant in the beautiful goods, he advised, adding that the correct framing will move merchandise even if it's old enough to have gray whiskers. And this art of illusion and showmanship is something that's displayed by the wizard and comes directly from his creator, L. Frank Baum. Now the wizard, after being exposed as a humbug, fulfills the wishes of the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, and the Lion. For the Scarecrow, he takes off the head of the Scarecrow and he fills it with pins and needles and tells him, "These are brains." He fashions a metal heart for the Tin Woodsman and puts it inside his metal chest, and he gives the Cowardly Lion a wonderful potion to make him courageous. So Jupiter, which represents the wizard, is not just a planet of journeys, but Jupiter is also a planet of acquired wisdom. Jupiter helps us to realize that what we wish for is often something that we possessed all along. Now, the only person who doesn't get her wish fulfilled is Dorothy. And I find it telling in this story that the wizard, a man, can't help Dorothy, a little girl. In fact, if you look at the company that Dorothy's been keeping lately, they are all fake men. There's a man that's made out of straw, another man that's made out of tin, and a lion who roars to make people think that he's brave. And finally, we have the wizard, who is himself a snake oil salesman. Indeed, these men were empowered by their adventures with Dorothy. So Dorothy is told by a palace guardsman that where she should go next, and this is after the wizard has flown away in a balloon, that where Dorothy should go next is south, that she should travel south into Quadling country to seek out Glinda, the Good Witch of the South. And so the gang, back together again, Dorothy, Scarecrow, Tin Woodman, and the Lion, hit the road and travel south in search of Glinda. But before we get to Glinda, I wanted to share with you the backstory of Glinda. L. Frank Baum's mother-in-law's name was Matilda Electa Jocelyn Gage, and she was an ardent feminist. In fact, she showed up at the unveiling of the Statue of Liberty in 1886 on a cattle barge with a megaphone, shouting, "It is a gigantic lie, a travesty, a mockery to portray liberty as a woman, when actual American women have so few rights. Male critics branded her as satanic, but Matilda Electa Jocelyn Gage was just getting started, and in response to being called satanic, she became an expert on the subject of witch hunts, so that in 1893 she published her manifesto, Woman, Church, and State. Gage chronicled in this book the mass killing of tens of thousands of human beings, mostly women, who were accused of witchcraft, so that when the Baums moved to Chicago, L. Frank Baum began accompanying his mother-in-law to lectures, seances, and other gatherings. They both joined the Theosophical Society, originally founded by Madame Helena Blavatsky. This heady brew of Hindu and Buddhist beliefs, along with mediumship and telepathy, and a belief in universal human rights, regardless of race, creed, or color, appealed to Gage. Gage called Theosophy the crowning blessing of her life. Gage encouraged Baum to write down The Wizard of Oz, which he was telling as a series of stories he was telling to children. She encouraged him to write them all down in a book, but unfortunately, she died 2 years before its publication. It was Gage who was the inspiration for the beautiful and benevolent Glinda. With Glinda, we meet Venus, planet of love, peace, and harmony. And it's fitting, if you think about it, that it is a feminine benefic that brings this story to a close. Glinda receives the travelers immediately and says that she can return Dorothy to Kansas right now, that it's no problem whatsoever. But before she does, she asks the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, and the Lion what they will do when Dorothy is gone. And they answer. The Scarecrow says that he's been invited to take over the throne of the wizard in the Emerald City. And the Tin Woodman says that he's been invited by the Winkies to rule over them now that the Wicked Witch of the West is gone. And the Lion says that he's been made king of the beasts during one of their many adventures, and that is what he is planning on doing when Dorothy goes back home. Glinda then asks Dorothy for the golden cap, and says that after everyone has said their goodbyes, that the flying monkeys, with Glinda's 3 wishes, will fly the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, and the Lion back to their respective kingdoms. Glinda says that after all of this is done, she will give the golden cap back to the king of the flying monkeys so that they will never be slaves again. Glinda then turns to Dorothy and tells her that the silver shoes can take her anywhere in the world, and that if she had known their power, she could have gone back to Aunt Em the very first day that she had set foot in Oz. And Dorothy asks Glinda, but why didn't someone tell me? It's the Scarecrow who says, I don't know, but if not for you, I should not have had my wonderful brains, and I would have passed my whole life in a farmer's field. And the Tin Woodman says, if not for you, I should not have had my lovely heart. I might have stood rusted in the forest till the end of the world. And the Lion says, if not for you, I should have lived a coward forever, and no beast in all the forest would have had a good word to say to me. The Scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, and the Lion have all found their proper places in Oz, their proper places in Dorothy's psyche. Potentials would not have been realized, and more importantly, Dorothy would not have befriended these energies if not for their adventures. Dorothy, at the end of this story, has faced the pain and loss of her mother and the embrace of herself. And Dorothy's ready to go home again. Go home, perhaps for the first time, to Aunt Em. So Dorothy clicks the heels of the silver shoes 3 times and commands them to take her home. Now, the character of Dorothy was named after a real person. L. Frank Baum's wife, Maud Gage, frequently visited their newborn niece, Dorothy Louise Gage, whom she adored as the daughter she never had. Unfortunately, the infant became gravely ill and died at the age of 5 months in Bloomington, Illinois, on November 11th, 1898, from congestion of the brain. Maud was devastated, and, to assuage her distress, Baum named his protagonist Dorothy, and he dedicated the wonderful Wizard of Oz to his wife. The baby was buried at Evergreen Cemetery, where her gravestone has a statue of the character of Dorothy carved from the remains of a 200-year-old oak tree. The oak tree, as you may already know, is ruled by Jupiter in astrology. And Baum, of course, means tree in German. Now, it's not quite like being made a constellation in the sky, which was Jupiter's way of honoring great lives and deeds, but it is certainly the next best thing.